Welcome to Simply Always Awake. We have a series of interviews. We call them awakening interviews, or the series of awakening stories, where I just talk to ordinary people, or maybe extraordinary people who have gone through some kind of shift in identity and experiences along those lines. And we just kind of have an organic conversation, unpack what's happened, and that's what we're going to do today. So I want to introduce Melanie.
Hi, Angelo. So happy to be here.
Thanks for coming. Let's just start with where ever it feels most comfortable for you to start, or wherever it feels most relevant for you to start. Take us back to whatever it is that we need to know about you to start to understand how things have played out for you in this whole wild and wacky awakening thing.
So, something that doesn't come up a whole lot in conversations with people who, are also on this path, is childhood, particularly having an experience of sustained awakening in childhood, or of course there's the subject of trauma in childhood, but say like early glimpses in childhood, I don't really hear that conversation, and I'm not sure why. It's something that I mostly just keep to myself. I feel that the experience I had it always struck me, all through my life, whenever I look back at especially the contrast between then and shortly thereafter, going into conditioning, when I had serious conditioning and delusion as a teenager. And in contrast, up until age 9, it was like a heaven on earth experience, but that had nothing to do really with the outside situation,
Yeah. Let us
it, yeah.
I was gonna say let's unpack it. I mean, I have heard some of these stories and so forth, but I want to hear yours.
Okay. So for some reason, I remember a lot about everything up until age. Well, of course, I remember things past that too, but so I hear a lot of people say they don't remember much, but for some reason, I remember a lot of details from way back then. So random memories, and like my house that I lived in up until age 6. I just remember everything about it, and whereas my sister's 3 years younger than me, she doesn't remember one thing, which I understand. She's 3 years younger, but on top of that, moments, especially like the mundane moments, were so fascinating and really held my attention. And I just, at some point, I told myself, I want to remember this. I want to remember how it feels right now. And that being said, of course, I wasn't putting together those thoughts and ideas about how great it felt necessarily, because I didn't have anything to compare it to yet. It was just normal. But at some point I knew this isn't going to be normal.
Mm.
As I get older,
Like the wisdom of a child, right? That
and
you knew that like there was some impending something that was going to obscure it,
yeah,
right? Like it's
yeah,
fascinating how wise children are.
yeah. So I told myself, remember this, and I have that memory in that old house of telling myself this. So, and I think that really kind of locked in all the memories. I was, because in that moment, I was conscious that I had this certain perspective and experience. that I knew as an adult, it was not gonna be the same at all. I just had this feeling. So, and maybe that's why I told myself, remember, because of the, so I'd have a better chance of, remembering in the face of all the conditioning. Because I observed all these adults around me that were, I knew something was going on there.
Mhm.
I saw them all in their heads and
Mhm.
various states of misery and
Man,
discontent.
it's so
Yeah.
fascinating. This whole thing is so fascinating to me because I personally remember I remember these instincts, these very clear instincts, and I remember being young enough to like not be forming a memory identity so much, but just being in presence. But like as you said, like there's not really a lot of thoughts at that point. There's not a self-referencing so much and stuff. But there's an instinct about reality, and you know it. And I remember it's the same thing of seeing adults. I didn't know I don't know if I would have put it together that they're like in their heads or in thoughts, but they were not there. Like they felt like they were not fully there or here. And it felt so uncomfortable. There's something not right about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
now it's completely normal to go around in that state, and why? I mean,
Right.
why is it normal? And I was heavy in that, and I still am heavy in that state, even though I feel very awake right now. And
Mm.
that's the thing is I know that it's always been there, the
Mhm.
awakeness. So, but it's so when I see like intellectual conversations about spirituality and non-dualism, it's like I kind of see the same thing
Mhm.
happening, like going into mind, and essentially the same thing as what I observed when I was a kid. And I just want to say, like, oh, you're in your mind.
Mm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. That's a very important statement. I might use the term like co-opting, like everything kind of gets co-opted, and it's very that the co-opting mechanism, whatever that is very flexible and accommodating, and it can accommodate anything, including non-duality and spirituality and
Yeah.
all of it. Yeah. Um, yeah. Do you remember like as you were growing up,
Yeah.
thoughts like starting to crowd in and starting to form an identity, or the feeling of how that experience was?
No. So I'm sitting here in sort of this awakened state. I don't really want to draw meaning from what I just said, but it's funny because it's like I feel like I'm in that energy from when I was young. And from that energy, no, I don't really remember what that was like, because I switched so quickly
Mm.
to it, oh my gosh, to because I was bullied at school and had a real hard time at home. And just all of a sudden it was suffering,
Mm.
just this wall of suffering that I felt so powerless. And I had an experience over the weekend, I'm not sure I'm going to share, but it it's like kind of brought some of that back. A lot of it is identity,
Mm.
that I'm a bad person,
Mm.
that I can't get anything right. So yeah, the bad person thing, that I'm in trouble. I'm deliberately causing pain to someone else, just really far-fetched ideas that aren't
Mm.
true, that I wouldn't want to ever do that,
I can relate to this
but
totally.
um, it came back, and I'm kind of glad for that experience, because you can forget what it was like. It's like deep in struggle as a child, feeling so powerless to your parents if you're in an abusive situation with bullies or whatever it is. And you just, I sometimes I just forget like the feeling of the thick of that, you know, and especially like exact things that were being said to me at the time, I blocked a lot of it out. So I wouldn't be able to say exactly the exact wording of things that were said. And so, but then when we have as adults experiences of pain where that narrative comes back and the identity comes back, and we can be like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's right, because I'm telling myself in this heated moment of feeling like the worst person on earth, the same things I was told in that abusive situation. Like I'm telling myself these things, and you know, so yeah, I was astounded by that. And I took my phone, I just recorded some of these things I was telling myself, and like, it's better to always put other people before me, and other people's feelings are more important than mine, and, you know, stuff like that. So all of this is deep inside me. It just, it has to be triggered by something like what happened to me this weekend, which, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can feel into that very clearly. Like, first of all, the conditioning hitting so hard as a child, like a wall. And then I just listening to you, it's like, oh, I can relate, where it was like 0 to 100 miles an hour, like just full
Yeah.
on massive conditioning. I guess, like looking back, I can kind of say maybe as the internal sense of self was forming and solidifying, it was capturing so much more of that. You know, it was like going both ways at some point, where it's just like so much intensity and heaviness and duality. It just felt so solid, but it's super uncomfortable, you know, and it's like, is anybody else feeling this? This is like what we're doing. Like, what the hell's going on? You know, like, let's just stop fucking doing this. But no one. It's just like everyone's just trying to do it more, you know, at everywhere, all of it, you know, all of the advice you get about how to feel better, and it's all the same shit. Like, whoa, you know, that happened to me for 24 years. I didn't see an opening for 24 years, the conduit back to that knowledge of the child that is beyond knowledge, you know, where it's like, oh yeah, of course. So then the whole thing is just kind of like, oh, it didn't really happen, but then you can definitely come into contact with some, you know, situations or conditions or material where you can find it again, which is good. It's really grace at this point. You know, after an awakening, you have to go back and see all of it, you know, and feel all of it. And it's really granular and really, really primal. You go way back when you experience those moments.
Yeah. And that heaviness, yeah, it's hard talking about time, right?
Mhm.
So who
Yeah,
knows?
I understand.
But I do feel that heaviness it's still there. I'm still having this identity that it's there,
Mhm.
and that it continues to cast this shadow over me, it feels. And it just makes it really, I have a difficult every day, a really hard time sort of just like meeting myself, you know, just like me and me. That's how it feels. Just me trying to meet with me to just get things done through the day. That could have something to do with ADHD. So, which I learned about a year ago that apparently I've always had
Mm.
ADHD. So I'm not really sure how that factors into everything. You know, I've heard people with ADHD, it's like struggle even more with focus, even more than the regular average adult steeped in mind stuff, right? But it's even more for ADHD, even harder to be in the moment.
Mhm.
and just do certain tasks,
Sure.
through the day. So
Sure.
I have had goals all my life, and it's kind of at this point an obsession. Can I make another step toward one of my many goals? Just one little step is huge progress. And
Mm.
so I don't know why that, for me, that's kind of the theme, is meeting myself, cooperating with myself, as opposed to like being in a structured environment like school. I always did really well in school in terms of being on task.
Mhm.
People around me holding me accountable, and that seems to be the key for living well. And for whatever reason, I've had a life experience of isolation in many ways, just
Yeah.
pretty much on my own. And uh, I don't know. There's so many questions, but it doesn't really matter why. It just
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
Just is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you at some point, I think you had mentioned when we were talking over email, you had a significant shift in the recent past, didn't you, of some kind?
In December.
Oh, that's right, December. Was this
Yeah.
in relation to a retreat or an online retreat?
um,
No. Okay.
dog sitting and cleaning up dog poop. So not a retreat.
Let's talk about the dog poop technique.
Okay.
Go on.
Technique. Okay, well, first of all, what kind of triggered this shift, other than watching some videos possibly leading up to it, um, was a angry text message that I sent to somebody, which my spiritual ego still tells me, that's so petty, Melanie. That's so unspiritual. Shouldn't even tell the story, But then that is that it was the impetus, if that's the right word, or trigger for this shift. And you never know what it's going to be, right? Yeah, so I was someone I went out with one time, like on one date, and didn't I fell out of contact with him following for like a month or so. And when I sent it, it was a few months after this date, and there was just very little contact between us, and all sorts of confusion. And I was so tired, and I've experienced this before, and this is just so tired with this thing that we do to each other that is considered normal and accepted behavior. So I expressed everything I was feeling about that. Not too long, but I guess whatever it was and the way that I said it opened up this whole part of me that I guess I don't let out really. I think that I make efforts to keep it under wraps, basically not beating around the bush, not sugarcoating, but just really coming out with how I feel about something. So, and so I sent this text, and then it was my last day of dog sitting that particular job. And I went around cleaning up dog poop around the outside of the house. Excuse me. And I just stopped all of a sudden. And I knew that there was this shift related to this text that was going on, or something like that. And I had this image of a snake, or something like a snake, shedding its skin.
Mm.
I had this, so it was like a visual of like a chunk of skin just barely hanging off, wanting to drop off. And that's how I was feeling in that moment. I still feel that way. And I said, I don't want it. And so that was kind of declaring to everything, the universe, that I want to drop this. And I want to drop everything that is fiction, basically, and holding me down. And that's not exactly, those are not the right words, but trying my best here.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. So I found myself saying, I don't want it. And and then I was in the laundry room later, and for just a split second, I was able to see the density and the complexity of this mind space that I've been living in for all this time, functioning from, experiencing from. And the, not layers, but the multitude of connections. Whenever I have a thought about anything, all of the places my mind goes to process that. And then if I'm in a conversation with someone, come up with the right words to align with what I'm taking away from that. After all of it has gone through all of the sort of interpretations and filters, and so I saw this whole kind of mechanism for a split second, and I thought, wow, this is hell. And this is what we do, moment by moment, and it's not fun. And I also had the thought, people should know about this, that this ability to see it for what it is. And as soon as you see it for what it is, you're not, in that split second, you're not in it anymore. You're seeing it. And I just thought, I want people to, or just people should know about this, because it's pretty, it changes everything once you can see what you've been basically living in and operating from. So
yeah. So like almost in thought, bouncing from interpretation to interpretation to interpretation, like reacting to those thoughts and not realizing that's not necessary, essentially, or that's not maybe what you are, something like that.
Yeah, it's just the way we engage with people and things and ourselves. It all, for myself anyway, I could see how it was going through this process. Just all these different points, and sort of the pressure of that, the congestion of that as well. So I could describe it to you better if, from that moment, that memory. And but it's I'm not able to describe it very well right now, but
yeah, no, I totally get it. I can feel it
a bit more clearly in that moment.
Of course, yeah. And did you notice after that opening, something in your experience felt different, like just ongoing?
Yeah. So through that day, I was driving back to my house, and the music on the radio sounded very alive. And for some reason, this rush of self-love rushed in, and it was a particular sensation that I don't often feel, um, and a sense of possibilities. There's so many possibilities.
Mhm. Mhm.
I wish I could say that was my daily reality, but it's not. So, but in that moment, it's like, oh my gosh, I can do this and this, and just feeling my worth and beauty and etc.
Mm.
Uh, and that particular flavor of awakenedness, it didn't really last, but I've
Mm.
had other flavors along the way and other glimpses.
Mm.
So, and
Beautiful.
I continue to have epiphanies and insights very regularly. So,
Mm. Yeah. Did you find also after that, like maybe after some time, that there was more access almost to the intense emotion type stuff, or the underlying, I don't know, reaction mechanism that seems to drive all those thoughts and so forth? Like, did things get in a sense more intense or more direct with any of the emotions?
I think being able to see the mechanics of the mind, I think that's just one aspect.
Hmm.
There's so many sort of ways to see, I guess, right? So it wasn't necessarily that, but more more feeling based. Yeah. For instance, my whole life I've had very vivid dreams at night. And to, and the last maybe year or so, um, I have felt more, I feel like there's kind of more of a blur maybe between this and the dream world.
Hmm.
So which is a little weird for me. But one thing I've always noticed about my dreams is how there's no me, right? And story, the stories and all that, that's something characteristic about how, so many of us live in society. So, and that's what causes all of our struggle and suffering, is this story. I need to do better in this thing that happened in the past, and I have these goals and ambitions, and I'm going to become somebody, and if I'm not somebody, then who am I suck, like I'm deficient. None of that stuff exists in the dream world. It's just
Mm.
seen, and like the Pirates of Caribbean, you just beholden to the scenes, and you go
Hmm.
from one to the other, and you don't have any opinions about it along the way. You're just ready for the next thing.
Like no internal world.
Yeah. Yeah. No requirements about how it should be. And so that has always been dream life for me. And so that kind of also reminds me of my childhood experience. So that aspect I've been kind of feeling into more and more. Um, just sort of wide-eyed, and but not really thinking about it, just
Yeah.
yeah, feeling in between two worlds basically.
Mm. Yeah.
So,
It's
don't know.
impossible to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, it's impossible to talk about. Welcome to my world. I talk about it every day. It's not even it to talk about. It's kind
Yeah.
of a joke.
I think you could tell that I am very passionate about words, as I had mentioned.
Yeah.
Words. And so that makes it even more difficult, because I don't want to use the wrong words that uh cause may cause confusion out there to anyone listening. So, but then
Well,
it's
yeah. When you're in
also,
this business,
yeah,
it's so tricky. And
yeah,
that's why I give basically disclaimers constantly. Any word I say, no matter what words I say, whatever phrase I say, it can always be misinterpreted, and it will always be misinterpreted to some degree. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have an effect. It can still be an effect, but just don't hold on so tightly. But I should say to anyone watching, I can't remember how I started noticing your name on the YouTube channel, but one of the things that happened recently was you educated me on what was the word? I can't even remember what the word was. I said a word wrong or something, and you said I misused a word.
Wary,
Oh,
wary.
that's right. I think so. I've done this before with wary. It's like there's like Wary, and then there's weary, and then there's leery. And I
Yeah,
think what I do is I mix up leery and um wary, and then I say weary, which means the wrong thing.
he's tired, worn out.
Yeah. Well, then I had a little bit of PTSD from that because the next time I read your comment telling me I used a word wrong, I was like, I don't think I used that word wrong. So I had to look it up and I realized there's two different ways to use the word. Well, I don't know what you call it. There's a term for the word that sounds the same but spelled different, has different meanings. It may be like I don't know, there's a word for that actually for that situation, but the word
Right.
was discrete, and I was saying like a discrete experience.
Yeah.
And then you said you gave me the definition of discrete, but it was spelled with Discreet. And I was like, but I was like, no, I know there's another way. So I had to look it up and realize. So we've been educating each other on um word use, which is really fun.
Yeah. I was like, are you sure you don't mean distinct when you say discrete? And then I was totally wrong.
Well, I did mean distinct essentially. That other meaning of discrete with the different spelling is kind of similar. But I thought it was fun. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we're frustrating.
Well, there was that, and then there was then I knew about you that you had a history of or not a history, I'm sorry, like it's not like a disease. It's you have you're a musician, right? Yeah.
It's
So I'm like,
true.
okay, you're a musician,
Yeah.
you're a linguist, and you've had some kind of shift in identity. So I'm like, well, of course I got to interview that person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us about your musical expression.
Yeah. So well, going back to childhood, I think kind of juxtaposed with this consciousness of seeing a particular way was this desire to make a mark in the world. And I don't know, I still don't know what that means or why I felt that, where that's how that's going to manifest eventually. But I knew I wanted to do something big, and I wanted to take the way that I was seeing things at that time and show, um, get, be able to have it be accessed, seen in the way that I saw it by others. So yeah, maybe that's what it was.
Mm.
Um,
Was it through word? Like was it more through the actual music, creating music, or more through voice or something?
so no, I think at the time I wanted to do something creative for sure. And I knew it was going to be between like fiction writing and music. I didn't know at the time that that would be the main thing I'd be doing for up until now. So at the time it's drawing, I really loved to draw and paint as well as write fiction and poetry. I thought it would be between those two. And I wanted to use that as the vehicle for what I just mentioned. Carrying this, whatever this was, out to be seen and experienced by others. And of course we all, I don't even know if this fits into the awakening enlightenment conversation or not. And but in another way that helps me to stay authentic with it, that particular
Yeah.
experience I had as a kid, if I just don't label it at all.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Did you find yourself simply just making music and you felt like a natural expression coming through that way? Or
Yeah. So I started writing songs when I was 20, and I did write from a personal level. And I knew in the back of my mind, I wanted to, take this experience of when I was younger and express that through the music. So I did what I wanted to do initially, and I did it through music. I think that I'm I felt at the time when I was younger, I want to do something like really big and not just play locally. Nothing's wrong with that, but I did that for most of my 20s. I played locally in San Francisco.
hmm.
So, but I think I always had kind of almost sense of a birthright or something, or a mission, like to do something very impactful, in the
Yeah.
world. So
What was your like genre or style of music?
so not completely obscure, not but not super mainstream pop. So accessible, but yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Oh I was doing so well until this point.
You're doing fine. You're doing totally fine. Here's what's funny is in this conversation is what I sense from you. Like I'll just like talk from my own intuition. So what comes through you is a very, very like intense awakeness. It's just so obvious. It's really obvious to me. And it's just like I don't know what to call it. It's not a personal thing at all. It has nothing to do. It's not like it has nothing to do with you as such, but it's just so obvious. It's like coming through full blast. But it's also trying to like be a human and talk about human stuff, which is hilarious because I'm making you do it. So this is a kind of a this is a silly sort of, format. Like we turn all this into stories, but what we're really talking about, what's really being talked about or transmitted or shared is just this like full on something that has no name, no location, that's nothing personal, and that's it. But you transmit it. I can just tell you right now, like I talk to people all the time about this kind of stuff, interview lots of different people, but there's a transmission coming through you that's really powerful, really powerful. It's just obvious. And that's probably been there the whole time, and then as you have shifts and stuff, it just gets stuff out of the way to let it come through more powerfully. And it's going to have an effect, a local effect around you. It's going to have an effect on people. Most of them won't even know it. They won't even know what's happening.
Yeah.
It's just there. It's like so obvious. It's really fun. And then there's layers of, like some identity remnants and stuff that are going to fall away. Of course, they always do. Yeah. It's really
Yeah.
beautiful. I actually really enjoy it. And but I can also see how it's hard for you to put together like a linear story because you're so steeped in this energy. You're like, which is great. Like, I love it. This is the kind of conversation I'd rather have than the ones I have, often have at work or whatever, which are necessary in those situations. I can't have these kind of conversations when I'm putting people under anesthesia. I have to talk technically and stuff, but it's still kind of a superficial level of functioning. But this to me is interesting. I don't care what you talk about or how well you can talk about it or not, because that's just a bunch of words.
Right.
What's underneath the words is what's interesting to me. What's coming through your whole being is what's interesting to me. And it's like loud and not loud in a bad way. It's prominent. It's very obvious. So
Yeah. My mind just tries to kick my ass every day.
mhm,
I feel like it just tries to keep me down so
mhm.
hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a question for you along those lines though. Do you have any specific approach or process with like emotion work specifically or shadow type stuff, or do you have like a go-to for that?
Mhm. Sorry, apparently I'm really thirsty.
No, go for it. Do it up.
No. But I've been seeing a psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
And I've told him things that I haven't told any other therapists. And I'm like, why didn't it occur to me to talk about bad things from my childhood in therapy?
Right.
It never occurred to me
Yeah.
until my psychiatrist. So that's, yeah, I don't know what to say. I think there's definitely stuff. Yeah. And lately I've been watching a lot of like crime shows and really stuff I should not be watching because some of it just like, I'm just like, I could be doing much more productive things right now. Like
I can relate though, because I've always had an obsession with suffering, strangely.
Yes.
Like it's truly an obsession with suffering to the point where it's like such dark things I'm taking in, and I can feel the effect they have. And yet there's part of me that's like, but I can't ignore this. I can't pretend this isn't happening because I can feel it, not just in myself and other people I come into contact with. Like the potential's there, to become extremely harmful, and tracking that down, it's like what else makes sense after the sense of self falls away. The only thing that makes sense to me is finding ways to mitigate suffering for people. That's it. However that needs to happen. And it can happen on the relative level and it can happen on the absolute level for sure. And most of my channel is on the absolute level in one sense, but there's a lot of suffering out there. And I really resonate with that it almost feels like a sense of duty. Like, how can I really ignore this stuff? But I also wanted to say, or I wanted to ask you, do you ever do retreats?
No.
Is it something you're interested in?
Yeah, but a lot of them are like $3,000, $5,000.
All right. I'll tell you what, I'm going to do a retreat. So we just did this multimodality retreat, which I invited the guys from the work. Have you seen that documentary? Oh my God, check it out. I promise you will be like, you won't even believe that happens, that people can do that kind of deep work. It's crazy, but it's awesome. So I invited like these guys who've been doing this for 25 years inside prison and then even longer outside prison. And it's a whole thing, but I invited them and I was like, okay, we'll do a retreat where I do all my usual stuff, like guided meditation, talks, and Q&As that I do. And I'll have a bunch of non-duality facilitators that can answer questions and do small groups. And I'm going to invite those guys from the work, they're called Inside Circle, to do this like deep emotion work with people for a whole day. Like groups of 20 people would go one day with these guys. And it was a total experiment. I mean, merging what I do with what they do, I was like, I don't know what the hell is going to happen. And it was crazy. Like some of the things I saw there, the transformations in people I saw at the emotion level, I've never seen anything like that fast, ever, ever, ever. What these guys do is full on, and they're really fucking good at it. They're really, really, really good at it. So, so the retreat was a success in that sense, but it's expensive because I have to pay all these people to come, and it's more of a conference. It's not easy to put together, financially. But I'm going to do it again next year, almost certainly. I'm working on the contract. If you want to go, I'll pay for you. I'll give you a free spot at the retreat if you want to go.
Next year?
It'll be in 2025 spring. So it'll be a year from now. But if you're interested, I'll get you a spot there. Anyway, it's totally up to you. You can get back to me on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I always have a few scholarships around for these things, depending on the person and who, whatever. My instinct is you would benefit tremendously from working with these guys. It's a trip. Like I saw things that really surprised me, and that's saying a lot anymore. I'll give you one story. I know we're not talking about this, but anyway, this story seems relevant. So this is really fascinating. So I met this woman at this retreat, right? It wasn't a silent retreat, so everyone's talking to each other in passing. And I met this woman who was, I don't know, maybe in her 40s ish. I can't remember exactly, but I can tell you what I noticed about her right away. I could notice how dense her energy was. She was pretty aware. I mean, she was clear and present, but she had a very heavy emotion body. It was so obvious. Like the kind of person where it's uncomfortable to talk to them. Do you know what I mean? Like I didn't dislike her, but it was really uncomfortable. I could feel like the anger right below the surface. It was intense. just being around her. So I met her briefly and I'd met everybody, right? So 5 days later, I'm in lunch line. I'm talking to people and I'm talking to this lady. And at first, when I saw her, I was like, oh, that's the lady I talked to earlier. But as I started talking to her, I'm like, oh, it's not her, and we were talking for like 5 minutes. She looked like her, but I was like, oh, there's someone else that looks like this here. And she was the most light person. Like she was so clear and so light and like remarkably fluid and with a sense of spontaneity and peace that most people don't have. And it was so sweet. And I was talking to her and I realized I had talked to this person before and it was her. And I was literally dumbfounded. I was like, wait a minute. You're her? I'm like, how I couldn't, it was like a different human being in the same body skin. And she was laughing and she's like, oh my God, everyone's telling me this. Is it that different? I'm like, girl, it is like night and day. You're so different. Like it was crazy. And she's like, yeah, all I know is I went in with those guys and they said, we can take anything you need to give us. And she said, I gave them everything. She said, you want my anger? I'll give you my fucking anger. She goes, I gave them everything and they absorbed it. She's like, I don't know what happened, but I had to do that. And no, I was there to do that. And yeah, there were other stories like this. That wasn't just one person. It was wild. So anyway,
Yeah.
if you want, I will more than I'll pay your way to that. You can let me know later on that.
It's really hard for me to accept generosity, but
I'm sure it is. I can tell it is. Well, you deserve it.
thank you. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you.
Yeah. You're a kind soul on the relative level. Like you have such a big heart and you are so porous energetically. Like you absorb it all. Like it's all you take it all on. And you've taken
Yeah.
on so much suffering in this lifetime. And at the same time, like I said, behind all of that, it has nothing to do with any person at all. There's this tremendous amount of energy that's like clarity coming through. And you have that's what I see as I'm talking to you. And it's beautiful, really. But I want to give you that. So we can talk about that later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll love it.
So I just have to say, so real quick, my mind definitely sabotages me every chance it can get. I think a lot of times that it's me doing that. I'm sabotaging, And so like last night, I didn't get like the ideal sleep that I could have gotten. So putting that out there, in hopes that it'll make me feel better.
Yeah.
But yeah, just bleh.
I feel you. Yeah,
Just,
it happens.
yeah, it happens. Okay. So
Mhm.
I'm not struggling with that. See, it's so much mind.
I know.
Mind just dominates.
Yeah. Mm. Well, the beauty of this that we're talking about is like, I talk to remarkable people. I do. I mean, all the time, right? These interviews and stuff, and it's really cool. But they're also remarkable in different ways. And you're remarkable in this specific way I'm talking about. I can just feel it. Like again, there's so much clarity coming through, but I can also feel that sort of trauma, like that there's some sort of barrier there. But the interesting thing about it, I just want to say this is it's not actually in the thoughts. The thoughts are a side effect of it. It's in the emotion body. There's something there that wants to be addressed or touched or allowed to actually have a voice or move a very specific way that everything in your instinct is like, no, 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 don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, right? Push it down, hold, and it'll come through, and that's it. And it'll unlock so much of this. What it'll unlock, I think, is the seeming like massive divergence between what the thoughts are trying to do and this clear radiance that you're always in touch with, and it. There seems like a massive divergence between those, but it's just that little fixation area that's not, I mean, it is little and it's a small thing, but it was buried deep, deep, deep by traumas. That's what it was. It was pushed down there. And through the traumas, you're actually told, keep that down there. Don't touch that. Don't look at it. It's terrible. It's horrible. That's what trauma is. It's brutal. It's someone who has had their own innocence taken, talking to somebody else, empathizing with that person's innocence, and then shutting down their empathy pattern so that they can show that person what trauma really is, and then take their innocence. And it just goes on and on and on, right? And we do it internally, like to our own internal processes. So it's just like it's like an energetic, I don't know how to say it. It's like a nucleus of self mistrust or something that can be in there, but it's accessible. And then there's, again, I'm always looking for modalities and people and groups that know how to access this in a very real way. And that's what I care about. Does it work? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. These guys from the work. It's just like, holy cow. So check it out. It's a really good documentary. It's probably my favorite documentary ever. Yeah, it's just incredible. And these are the most traumatized people you've ever seen, criminally traumatized themselves, and then they became criminals, like many of them. And but they gone through this whole process, the work process, and they leave prison and they have a 0% recidivism rate. Zero. None of them have gone back to prison at all. And
Oh,
they're like
wow.
the most heart open, warm people you'll ever meet. And they're extremely insightful. Like
Yeah.
they can see right through you. It's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
I feel better now. I feel like this is what it is. And
Mm. I'm happy to sit here and just feel with you.
yeah. Well, I think you're very good at expressing yourself, and there is this intellectual space. And there is that little feeling of pressure, like, oh, I want to keep up with all the nuances, and I can't, right now, probably because I haven't slept as much as I normally do.
Yeah. You're
But I
doing
can't,
fine.
like,
I mean, you really are doing fine. Like, you know, yeah, you're coming across very clearly and it's
okay.
palpable. I can feel it. Yeah.
Yeah.
In my
Okay.
heart. I feel it in my heart space. So if I
Okay.
put my attention in my body right now, I just feel like a lot of heart energy. It's actually not in just in the body. I'm just saying that, but it feels like centered in the heart space, in relation to talking to you.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so now, what do I talk about? What should we talk about?
Well, we can talk about anything. Yeah. So music wise, are you currently producing music, making music, or how might people find your music?
So it's through that link I shared with you, melaniekeller.bandcamp.com.
Okay.
And I have learned how to produce my own music. So starting in 2020, I finally learned a program, and a really popular one out there is Ableton. So I learned Ableton, and I recorded and produced my first song, like Call Myself. I've done it before, but a long time ago on tape.
Uh-huh.
It's really empowering to be able to learn one of these programs, and the technology now, it's amazing. So
Mm. I Call Myself, you said.
what?
You said it's called I Call Myself?
No.
Oh, would you call it the song?
I didn't mention a song. I was just
Oh.
saying,
Oh,
oh,
I'm sorry. I thought you said I made a song called I Call Myself or something.
the first song that I recorded and produced is called Projection of Stars.
Oh, oh.
Yeah, that was October 2020. And
Projection of Stars.
yeah,
Oh, I love it.
so that was really empowering, because I've always wanted to just get in the engineer chair and do everything myself in the studio. And essentially that's kind of what it is, producing from your own bedroom. So
Yeah.
you learn how to do all this stuff that was at one time just accessible in a professional studio. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, how fun. Yeah. I learned a digital audio workstation a few years ago to make like the guided meditation background sounds, but it's
Yeah.
complex, but it's really fun once you start getting the hang of it. Like you realize how powerful that is. You can do anything with those.
Yeah. So it's pretty addictive as well. So,
Yeah.
and so you'll see 5 different songs, on my Bandcamp site.
Awesome.
And yeah, I feel like the songs from the last 5 or 6 years, they reflect more my actual sound, my
Hmm.
true sound. Because I've kind of experimented with different sounds along the way. And I've had, like I said, influences in my life that maybe I was overly influenced certain times of my life by the artists that I really loved. So I had to sound eventually.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Sorry,
Beautiful.
I just really cough.
You're all good.
So,
Well, we'll link that under the video too, so anybody can find your website.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have this sound, and I feel I have all these tools and opportunities, but then it's the mind comes in again and wants to take control, wants to sabotage. So
Yeah, it happens.
yeah.
Yeah. I totally understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's easier to talk about music from that conversation of awakening a little bit, being in the, sitting here now kind of in that space. It's hard not to just stay in this space.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very, very enjoyable.
As opposed to a different interview I might have, and I'm just kind of logistically talking about this and that, and I got my degree in music, and then this happened. This is a different kind of talk.
Yeah. Well, we could just sit here and like do eye gazing for an hour too, and that would be fine. Because to me, I enjoy silence. When I do a silent retreat, it's like my favorite thing. Because it's not like I'm not aware of people around me. I'm totally aware, of course, the energetics of it all. But without the sort of static that comes with like a lot of talking, it's a much more enjoyable just to be in that environment and sit in presence. Yeah.
Right. And possibly that's this presence is well, I don't want to say becoming a new identity. I'm kind of feeling into it as more a possible, kind of like who I really am, and not everything that I thought I was. No, we're sitting here right now. I'm like, who did I think I was before? I don't know.
Right. It's funny to even consider walking around thinking about yourself that you are this or that. It's really hilarious, like, because that's not even happening. Like I mean, there's a thought that seems to look like that, but it's like that's never even started happening, which is hilarious.
Yeah. It's like I'm kind of losing my grip on the identity foothold.
Yeah.
What was I talking about?
Yeah. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it's I remember as a kid, I'd watch different shows on TV, and there's always a subject. There's always but it's never like, hey everybody, we're going to talk about nothing.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's so funny because it actually works when you do it, right? Look at Seinfeld, the whole show of Seinfeld. It's like a show about nothing. That's like stupid, but yet there's so much comedy in it, and there's so much that comes out of like not having actually a real goal, which is hilarious, you know?
But if that had ever happened, as a kid, I'd be like, oh yes, finally. And it's about this thing.
Well, here's an interesting thing too. I mean, we've talked about trauma and emotion stuff and all that comes with all of the humanness, but there's also what I'm picking up as we talk is like, this is something that took me, I guess, a long time to learn. But if I talk too directly about nothing, if I talk too directly about emptiness, it's really unsettling for a lot of people. It's just that it's very, and I've always known that, like I've always known to like avoid it, you know?
Yeah.
But that got built into the sense of the person, which is hilarious because it has nothing to do with a person, but it got built into that sense of a person trying to move through the world in the way that this external madness has dictated you're supposed to move through the world, which is, it's like, that's so uncomfortable. But now it's like, oh, okay, I don't care. I mean, I don't need to talk about it. It's just everything it's everything, you know? It's the loudest thing in the room at all times. And It's almost like my own little secret. But sometimes I talk to somebody like you and I'm like, oh, there's other people in on that secret too, apparently. Other apparent people.
Yeah. Well, I haven't for whatever reason, that hasn't been a regular experience for me. I mean, I'm most of the people I talk to and I'm around, like we don't, it's not that, it's not this.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Yeah.
it's 99% the world.
Yeah.
You know, everything that we deem important. So, and apparently I can still operate pretty well.
Yeah.
And convince people that, oh yeah, it's really, all these things are really important. And convince myself. But I'm here and it's, well, of course I'm here.
Oh my gosh.
Just
It's so
kind of
funny.
clean right now, maybe.
Yeah. I'm not laughing at you. I totally get it. And you
Yeah.
know, well, it was like a hard lesson for me to learn too, that people really do use the mind identification stuff to to actually stabilize themselves. And that's hard. It's hard to authentically communicate when that's happening all the time, because it's not authentic for me to uphold that, to go into complicity with it in a deep way, you know?
What's an example of that?
Say again.
What's an example of that?
Well, it's interesting. Good question. An example of how people use mind identification to stabilize themselves?
Yeah.
Oh, in using it's like using an addiction to reacting to thoughts, using their own addiction to reacting to thoughts, the addiction itself, using that to avoid seeing what you don't want to see, and that is that none of it's true. None of it's true. None of what you think is true about yourself or the world is true. And so it's like, this is going to be a really strange analogy, but I don't think it's off. Actually, I think it's an extreme version of what I'm talking about. So this will get dark for a minute when we talk about looking up, like, uh, things that are dark and what we were talking about earlier. But so you remember the thing that happened in Rwanda in 1990s, right? There, I don't know if you know about it, but like suddenly, and it was based on sort of a propaganda and this whole thing that happened, but suddenly this whole group of people that was supposedly in one sort of tribe, but it wasn't even the tribal nature of that was imposed by the Europeans a long time ago, that it was totally artificial to keep the ruling class in place, and then all this other stuff. So, but so there was this artificial division, but all of a sudden one of those groups just started slaughtering the other group, like literally just killing their neighbors, and it was like hundreds of thousands of people in a few months with machetes, like complete insanity, like horrible, horrible stuff, right? Um, and the Hotel Rwanda came out, the movie and all that. It was just super harrowing, to even read that this happened. It's crazy. And then it kind of just stopped. Like after a while, it stopped, and then there was after a few years, there was really not a lot of strife between those two factions. They just kind of stopped being a thing, like the false tribalism. Anyway, to make a long story short, when to make a long story longer, when I watched this sort of documentary, I think it was 10 years after, just 10 years after this mass like genocide of your neighbors, like people killing each other in hundreds of thousands, right? Only 10 years later, they were interviewing all these people in Rwanda, and they were like in this place of just peace. They were just like, oh yeah, yeah, it was terrible when that happened, And one of these guys was talking about it, and I think he was one of the people who was like on the wrong side of it, murdering people, but he was just so light about it. And he's like, oh yeah, it was just like this like demon took us over. It was really weird. Like, yeah, all of a sudden this demon came into us and just took us over. Like, he didn't actually have a sense of ownership for it. But what was really interesting is he was talking about, he's like, what would happen is you'd kill somebody, and then the next day you'd wake up and you'd feel so bad about it. The only thing you could do to make yourself forget about it was go kill people again. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the addiction cycle of thought, reaction to thought, and denial of a truth, and using that as your actual drug. When you use that as your drug, and you have a lot of really heavy conditioning, and you're in an environment of fear, you have a potential for massive violence. And that's what happened to this big group of people. Another way of saying it is Paul Hederman, a non-duality guy, has said so many times. He had a history of addiction himself. He said so many times, though, the biggest addiction of all by far is the addiction to self. That's what people are avoiding. They're avoiding seeing the fundamental truth of Buddhism, which is no self. And that's no small thing. That has huge implications in the human psyche. It's not just I don't know, like a sort of debate over doctrine meaning or something. No, this is deeply embedded in the human psyche. And what I realized, to go round back to answer your question, what I realized is people are actually using the drug of mind identification, that whole mechanism of reacting to thoughts, avoiding thoughts, and then reacting to the next thought, and on and on and on. They're using that drug to avoid seeing this fundamental truth that you aren't actually there in the way you think you are. You're not there at all. And that's so scary and so terrifying that people will use that to stabilize themselves. And a really potentiating way of using that drug is actually through conversation, through complicity with other people. And a
Okay.
lot of it is passed off as innocent conversation, just talking about what we normally talk about, complaining, gossip, these things that are just a little bit violent, not a lot, but just enough to keep that drip, that constant drip of self-delusion going, right? That's the kind of stuff I see all the time, all around me. And what's strange is I don't have to judge it, and I don't even think it's wrong. It's just what's happening, but I can see the implications of it. It's very obvious. And so to engage those conversations at the level of making the assumptions that the conversations are based on, those fundamental assumptions, I can do it for short times, just for practical means at work and all these things. But in a deeper conversation with someone I'm closer to, or I'm being truly authentic, I can't uphold that. I can't pretend that's true because it's not true. And I can't pretend this doesn't cause violence because it does. And I can't pretend it doesn't cause trauma to people, and for you to perpetuate trauma on even people who are close to you. I can't pretend that doesn't happen because it does. So if I'm going to have a truly authentic conversation like you and I are having, I'm going to not mince words, and say that, as the Bodhisattva vow says, greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. That's damn straight true. And it goes deep in all of us.
So the first thing I think of is some gaslighting. That, first of all, the word, it can be misused, like grossly misused.
Gaslighting.
The word gaslighting,
Yeah.
it's a charged word, so I try not to say it unless I'm accurately using the word. But I did experience that when I was younger. And so speaking of, delusion and, confronting someone who's just like really wrapped up in this mind stuff, and they're so sure that the way they see things is the way that it is, right? That was much of my early life, just trying to survive in this kind of environment. I haven't quite found a way to, I'm talking about like real serious cases of delusion, and I haven't found like the right way to just exit that conversation, or and it provokes fear inside of me because of my experience of kind of like a domination dynamic. So whenever I have felt threatened, intimidated by someone who's then kind of turns it to me and sees me as some kind of a problem or threat, because of my childhood, I don't know how to handle that. It's very scary. I can't, you can't, as they say, you can't reason with someone who's irrational. So when it's like that extreme.
Yeah.
And I have this idea that, as well, if I'm like, a sign of being really evolved, spiritually evolved, would be to be able to speak directly to that person. And I just, that's probably the most, I think we all have those really, really hard things.
Mm-hmm.
That's my really hard thing. It's like,
Yeah, I get
yeah,
it. I totally get it.
yeah. So if,
Yeah, a lot of that. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, so if someone is rational and reasonable, then they will, they can hear me. They're capable of hearing my feelings on a situation. You know, there's a reasonableness, but if that's absent, it's, I have that's it's this panic, this moment of panic and terror that I don't, haven't quite resolved. It's part of the shadow work, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. People who are unpredictable as well. That
Yeah,
I find people are unpredictable. It's unset. It can be really unsettling, especially if you were as a kid if you're around unpredictable people, it can be
right.
deeply unsettling. And you can even have a trauma response to that where you actually, it's like keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. You can actually attract toward that type of personality sometimes, but it's not logical at all. But it's like, if your parent is the unpredictable one, you're going to kind of keep an eye on them all the time, and you're going to kind of move toward where they are sometimes without realizing it, to keep an eye on them, so you can predict their behavior, and so forth. Anyway, that's been my experience of like realizing the deep effects and long-term effects that being around a really unpredictable human being when you're a kid has on you. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's like, okay, you're whatever you want. I'll just be here in the corner and I don't need anything. I don't want
Yeah.
anything. Whatever
Yeah.
makes it easier. So that has repeated itself here and
Mm,
there in your life.
sure.
So, but it's interesting because what's happening with me now is it's kind of like none of that. In a way, it doesn't matter, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then it's confusing to me. I'm like, well, so do I have to work on my chaba or not?
Mm,
And I'm kind of intuitively going into more of that mysterious place,
mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
and of just maybe this can just be it.
Mhm.
And maybe I don't have to fix myself. And um, so that's kind of the enduring question. Like, which one
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah. I find that that's an important one too. And I mean, we both know there are people who will err so far on the side of there's nothing to do and there's no one to do it, that it starts to become pathologic, can be avoidant and disassociated. What's that?
Yeah, I know not to go there.
Well, there's definitely that side of things. There's also the side of things where it's like wound worshiping, where it's like your whole identity is based around your trauma and
Yeah,
your pain, where that you talk to everyone about it, but you're not really doing the deep work necessarily. You're just talking about the deep work. So you can actually bypass, I think, both ways, strangely. But there is a happy medium, and it's a moving mark. I think we have to trust our instincts that, yeah, sometimes I actually have to face my fears. And that's, I can't just avoid facing my fears in this moment because that's what I'm called to do. At other times, of course, just, disappear to the void, and that's fine, or disappear into the plurality too, and all that's called for. But this is just what I found. Over as realization deepens, your instinct gets very precise. Like, when it's time to do that and when that's avoidance, and there's just something that knows, and I can never predict it. That's the thing. I can't predict what's going to happen in the next moment, what I'm going to be called to do, and it may be completely letting go, and it may be putting up a boundary in some very precise way that I didn't want to. And you can still do it even if you don't want to, and it can be uncomfortable and you can still do it. But it is a little tricky after awakening because you feel everything so much more directly. It's like, wow, which turns out to be fine. But you have to go through all those interpretations that made you avoid your own emotions, for so long, and all of it. Anyway, that's just my personal journey of it. And yeah.
here I am feeling that little bit of pressure, address everything you just said, which is
Oh,
impossible.
you don't have to. I'm just blabbing. I talk a lot.
Yeah. Um, gosh, so many. Maybe this is just kind of part of the process as well. It's like it's like, oh yeah, this thought, and then I can't hold on to the thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and
yeah.
our conversation was like non-linear and like here, there, around, this way and that way, and all kinds of things. But it's been fun. I've been enjoying it. Is there anything else you want to talk about before, we kind of finish off, or want to put out there for people to know about you, or to know about awakening, or to know about anything?
I've got to think about this for a second. Yeah. It's like, I feel like there's something in me that just wants to go really deep. And we're used to having these conversations that make sense. We're not used to conversations that don't make sense.
Mm.
So, and this deeper part of me, I know it's not going to make sense, and there's, yeah, a little bit of not knowing, it doesn't know how to express in this,
Mm.
context. We're here to talk about awakening and spirituality, but even with that, are you still there?
I'm here.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. But even with that, that's still like a framework.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Something in me is just deeper. But words, I'm speaking these disjointed sentences, and then my mind is like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
So it's like trying to come out, but it can't come out. And I think it does go back to that thing that when I was younger, I want to create or express something. It just I don't know yet what that format's going to be, so I can talk about my experiences and the shifts and music, but it's like there's something else that just wants to talk about, but I don't even know. You would be the one to talk about this, and
Well,
still,
yeah, but you're also,
awesome.
like I said earlier, you're transmitting it, just trying to talk about it. Really, I can feel it. Like it's like poetry. If you say what I want to say doesn't make sense, well, poetry doesn't always make sense logically, right? It's not a logical thing in the poem. It's words being used in a different way than we normally use them. But a good poem really transmits something. Just you, quote unquote, trying to talk about this, but pointing out your experience as you do is actually transmitting. Like, it feels like a transmission to me. It feels clear, actually, really cool. I like it. I could listen to you do that just because it has a transmitting effect. Yeah.
But you
Cool.
can also see, because sometimes I'll watch someone expressing, just, it doesn't matter what it is, but they're trying to express, and it's a little tiring as the viewer. It's like,
Yeah. Well, it depends on what they're saying. Depends how well they're transmitting to me, I think. I think I know what you mean by this. And sometimes I think people are in their head, actually, like really in their head. And it's just like concepts and blah, 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 blah. And it doesn't feel deep. So for me, I just trust my intuition. Like it's always feel. So when I listen to you, even though you're kind of saying like I can't actually use words for this, it doesn't matter. It's the cadence with which you speak. It's your eyes, your body movement. It's coming through truly powerfully. Yeah, to me it is, at least. I don't know if anyone else gets it, but it's very obvious to me, and it's cool. It's really cool. It's beautiful to be that open, be that kind of open conduit. Now, the funny thing is, in the relative world, that open conduit sometimes has trauma, sometimes it has other challenges and all the things, thoughts, but none of that shit matters. That stuff is like a bit of space dust flying through an infinite expanse of space. Like, it doesn't even matter. For me, at least, energetically, what comes through is so clear, and that's where you and I are not too here.
yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So for me, it just keeps going back to that childhood experience and reacquainting myself with it.
Mm,
Yeah, reacquainting myself with it, and this wanting to talk about it, like,
mm,
wow, this,
mm,
wanting to talk about it and not knowing how.
mm,
And but I see like the correlation with the dream world, which not a lot of people talk about the dreams that they have at night.
mhm. Yeah.
Oh, same thing with the solar system and the galaxy, and we don't sit around talking about the Milky Way, but that is all kind of in the same realm for me. So
Yeah.
that's okay. It took me this long to get
There you go.
here. That's that's
Nailed it.
that's what I'm here to talk about.
Oh, well, I think that's a perfect way to end. I'll clip that out, put it at the beginning, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Melanie, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's really, I've enjoyed it. It's just like I said, it's non-linear, and that's fun because it has more of an organic feel, but it also has a very deep feel too, which is really cool. So it's been a pleasure, and we'll definitely stay in touch. And we'll put
Okay.
your link to your music underneath this video, so anyone who wants to watch it can.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much.